Welcome, everyone. My name is Bill Nemeth. I run the Burton D. Morgan mentoring program for Jumpstart. I'm going to be your moderator for today. I am a recovering entrepreneur. I don't just run the mentoring program. I had a company that I ran through the 2008 financial crisis and the Great Recession that followed. Grew it to about 350 employees, but have scars that are similar to our panelists, having come through managing a company in a crisis. That being said, our topic area today isn't a broad one like our webinar last week. This is specifically around renegotiating. We wanted to bring this one up first because so much is in flux right now. The old rules that you're used to don't necessarily apply. We've all got contracts, we've all got obligations. You as an entrepreneur, as a business owner, are kind of sitting in the middle of suppliers and landlords and banks and customers, and are going to be getting things from all different angles. You may be the recipient of a negotiating offer, or you may be the initiator of a negotiating offer. You want to make sure you're prepared for that. Before I introduce the panel, I want to give you a couple of housekeeping items. This isn't a big polished webinar. This isn't a show. There won't be slides. This is about answering your questions. So please, there's a chat screen, answer your questions. We have people monitoring those, as I will be. We will try to keep them in context of the conversation that's going on. But please, if you want to shape the conversation we're having or want specific things answered, get them up there. Don't be offended if we don't get to them right away. We will do our best. We're going to try to go through things like legal issues, landlord issues, suppliers and vendors. How do you deal with your suppliers? Customers. How do you negotiate with your customers? Banks, employees, and then some just general guidelines on negotiation. So if there's something that fits in there or not, or you'd rather it be in a different order, please let us know and we'll go ahead and change things around. So please ask questions throughout this. Lastly, I would like to, but certainly not least, I want to introduce our panelists. We have 5 panelists here today that represent all different facets of the value chain. Bankers, reformed bankers. We've got entrepreneurs, we've got serial entrepreneurs, we've got a lawyer, we've got landlords, we've got technology people, non-technology people. We've got a good mix of people that have been there, done that, and are working through a lot of these issues right now, but have the reference point of what they did in 2008. So with that, I'm going to ask each one of our panelists to introduce themselves, give a quick 1-minute intro or so, and then give us that one thing that you want the audience to take away. So I will start, ladies first. We will start with Ann Ritchie. Ann, please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Ann Ritchie. I am a venture partner at Jumpstart. I work with tech and non-tech businesses, essentially helping them grow. My background is I am a reformed banker. So I spent about 25 years in banking, never made a new loan. I only did workouts, restructurings, and bankruptcies. So this is the time when workout people get excited, I guess. But I also spent 2 years in a private equity backed turnaround chief restructuring officer position. So I've kind of been in the shoes of an entrepreneur, and that was unfortunately in 2008.
Thank you. One thing that you want the audience to know, your 1-sentence commercial?
I would say, and I'm sure everyone will reiterate this, time is not your friend in situations like this. And a lot of times it's hard to make decisions. So if you can't make the decision, at least set the date that you will make the decision. So in terms of just kind of planning ahead, if you get stuck, just at least have a timeline when a drop date did, when you will pull the trigger on anything related to a workout.
Thank you, Ann. Sam Gerace.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sam Gerace. I have started, grown, and sold 4 software companies over the last 35 years. The one that you may know about is Flash Seats, ticketing for sports and live entertainment. Over those 35 years, I can count 4 distinct periods I'd call crises of one form or another. So as Bill said, I've got some of the scars that exist from managing through, and hope that we can all help one another as a community by sharing information today. My one thing is that, and I'm the son of a now retired attorney, so law was my dinner table conversation. Any agreement can be renegotiated. In America, we give undue stature to legal agreements, I think because we have a very short cultural history and we don't have as many societal mechanisms for working out disputes. But any agreement can be renegotiated, and I encourage you to shift your frame of mind into that one in a crisis.
Thanks, Sam. Jonathan?
Hi, everybody. My name is Jonathan Vinoker. I am, I think, what a father of a son of an attorney. So I am an attorney, and at Thompson Hine in Cleveland, and spend all of my time working with entrepreneurs, early stage companies, high growth companies, generally on the software and hardware side. My one takeaway, and I certainly agree with everything Sam said on the legal front. You know, the other part of all of this, I think, is going to be communication. And my guess is that throughout today, we'll talk a lot about this, but I actually think that even in renegotiating those things, getting your message out there early and being decisive about what you want that outcome to be is going to help. No matter if you're receiving a request to change that contract, as Sam suggested, or you are proposing that you change it on your end.
Thank you, Jonathan. Roy Hodge.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Roy Hodge. I'm a 20-year IT professional, transitioned entrepreneur, and most of my experience has been security, cloud infrastructure, and IoT solutions as a provider. I founded RE8 System Solutions back in 2006. We've got a commercial and government business. I negotiate, contracts with personnel, suppliers, vendors, and partners. Back in July of 2019, I joined the Jumpstart team as entrepreneur in residence. So I work out of our Toledo office, providing hands-on technical assistance services to our clients. I agree with what Sam and Jonathan said about any contract can be negotiated. From my experience, it's about two things: getting to the right person within the organization that you need to engage the renegotiations with, and then secondly, having a scripted outcome of what you would like for those negotiations to be.
Thank you, Roy. And last but not least, Dan Spring.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Dan Spring. Company's NAI Spring Realty. We're a commercial industrial brokerage. We also do property management, and we manage anything from retail, industrial, office, and about 1,800 apartments. I guess my main takeaway for today is communication is key. We're at tough times, both from landlords, tenants, everybody's standpoint, and the quicker you can communicate and let us know your situation, the more we can help each other out.
Thank you. Well, with that, we're going to launch into questions. We have some coming up already, so if I get one more in a certain line, I may shift gears quickly. But in the general area, and I'm going to start with Ann. What's different this time versus the last crisis?
Well, I think for a lot of clients, it might be the suddenness and the because I think it's a medical thing, it feels more personal. So I think there's more emotion involved. And so not only are you dealing with your business, you're also dealing with your health and your family and your parents. And so I feel when I work with my entrepreneurs, it's a heightened level of emotion. And again, I'm a little bit of a germaphobe, so I was predicting that this would happen. But, so I was talking to my clients in February about this. But I think a lot of people were blindsided when they had to literally shut the door and not stay open.
Okay. I'm going to throw this in your lap, Roy. What's fair game for negotiating?
I think it depends on who's initiating the negotiation. So, for me, I was in a situation where I had to get out of it in order to keep the doors open. So, about it for me, it was really about being proactive and transparent, because it was a relationship that was good up until that point. The market shifted, and so we had to shift with it. So I had to look at our bottom line and be completely honest and transparent with what we were able to do and what that time frame was. And I believe that was received well. So that allowed the dialogue to start. And then from there was a back and forth, and then we agreed on something that was mutually beneficial as an outcome.
Now down those lines, Dan, you as a landlord may be the last person somebody wants to talk to. Well, outside of Jonathan, and well, maybe
Yeah,
the bank. Never mind.
I was shocked that didn't come my way. Thanks, Bill.
I'm trying to be nice to you, just this once. Dan, you've got tenants out there. I mean, is hiding a good strategy, or should they be reaching out to you?
It is, and I mean, reaching out to us so that we can communicate. The fact is, we're in different times. I mean, yeah, in the past where I have tenants that have issues, there may be things where attorneys or different people get involved. But in these times, if we can just have those open conversations as soon as possible, it's a huge help. We're trying to figure out where we're at, and so are several of our owners, where they're looking and trying to talk to their banks and figure out, especially on the retail plazas, who's going to pay, is anybody going to pay, are they going to pay half, can they pay something? So the quicker we can figure that out, the more we can then go back to and deal with other things on the other side, which would be the bankers.
Okay, so you're saying be proactive, you're expecting it, you're hoping for it.
We are, and truthfully, even from our standpoint, we are reaching out to some of those people as well. If we don't hear from them, we're reaching out to them and just trying to get an idea where everybody's at, especially the people that are shut down, the fitness centers, the restaurants that aren't operating and doing carry out. We're just trying to get an idea where they're at.
Is it in a landlord's best interest for somebody to go dark? I mean, and move out, or would they rather do something to keep them in place?
No, I would say do something to be in place. I mean, these are, I mean, most of the tenants are good tenants that have been great tenants for years. It's unfortunate circumstances. So the last thing we want them to do is go dark and walk out. I mean, if we can, the hope is this thing is not going to last forever. And we want to continue to have those great tenants in there that we've had and that good tenant mix. And, we went into a business relationship with them from the very beginning, and we hope to continue that and just find a way to get through the next, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, whatever it is, and then keep the plaza in good shape if it's retail.
Okay, I'm going to kind of take a tangent, but very related. Jonathan, I've heard from entrepreneurs, and I've heard for different levels of advice of people saying, well, I'm just going to invoke my force majeure clause. I'm not going to pay. They're just sending letters to the landlords. They're sending letters to other folks and just saying, that's it. I don't need to pay. And I'm invoking it unilaterally. Does that fly?
It can, but it really will depend on what that contract says. Not all force majeure clauses are created equally. Force majeure clauses that reference work stoppages and governmental orders or even acts of God, those are the types of force majeure clauses that would work in these instances. But not all, again, of that template language works in the same sort of way. The other thing about this, though, and Bill, you said, does it work? Well, from my perspective, that it matters what you want that outcome to be, and most of those agreements will say, well, now you don't need to perform over the period that's in place, But just as soon as things let up and everybody's back on track, now you need to start paying. So this doesn't terminate the lease. This doesn't terminate the contract. It just might provide some short period where payment isn't required, and it still might. But I really think the most important part of all of this is to think about, well, what happens at the back end of that? How do you want to manage that relationship? To Dan's point, your landlord might continue, your landlord will continue to want you to be in that space. So let's talk about what it's going to look like in the third quarter, the fourth quarter, as opposed to just sort of skipping out and then hiding under a bush. So legally it can work, but does it really work for what you want your ultimate outcome to be?
Which is a neat segue. I'm going to throw this in Sam's lap. I feel like this is the Hollywood Squares or something. The question here is the difference between legal and business. When it comes to negotiation, how do you balance it? What do you consider first? I guess, what's your thought process?
Yeah, and Bill, let me tell you, I've had the good fortune to work with Jonathan, who's been outside counsel, and I've been on the board of 2 venture-backed companies where he served in that role. And he understands business and how to make the role of an attorney high value to a business leader. I've met some attorneys who would like to protect you out of business, and they don't understand the business practicalities. And Jonathan's last comment is an important example, which is think about the business relationship you're desirous of after the fact. And I think that's it's a good jumping off point to say what's legal and what's contractual. There are other cultures that understand that a contract is a snapshot of a continuous negotiation, right? I don't think any contract's actually ever been adhered to the letter. Because things are always changing, and you may try and adhere to it to the letter, but there's some minor term that neither you nor the other party will find practical over the long term. So I really think the important thing is to be thinking in terms of the business frame, and to memorialize that with contracts and renegotiations as often as practical. In the case of a crisis, it may be not only practical, but critical for survival. But again, I think the format is figure out your business need, figure out the key situations that need to change, express those with your business partner, and let the attorneys memorialize that in a contract that's appropriate.
Thanks. Since you brought up business need and kind of what order to deal with things. Anne, you are the banker. You're living through this with some of the companies now. What do you look at first? What do you look at to negotiate first?
If you're the client of a bank?
Yes.
Okay, I gotta switch hats. I think I would assume most of it is payment relief, just getting out from under the principal and interest payment that's due without tarnishing the bank relationship or triggering a default. I think there's a lot of moving parts with bank debt. And so there's rate, there's terms, there's default rate, there's a lot of triggers you can pull, but I think if you're preserving cash, you want to make sure that you, with the consent of your bank, keep as much cash as you can from operations and deal with the loan maybe on a longer term or a lower rate or some other accommodation. I also think that there's a tendency to try to draw down on your available credit because you're scared that the credit's not going to be available. That's a very natural response. And from the client side, it is a good strategy because the lines of credit do disappear and most of them have the language in it that they can make them disappear on very short notice. So I would think the main negotiation will be preservation of cash. I will also add that banks have this like smoke and mirror effect. And so behind their actions are regulations. And, when I hear Sam and Dan talk about, even real estate negotiations, they have banks behind their transactions as well. So when you say, I'm not going to pay my landlord, the landlord's got to go back, the property owner has to go back to their bank, perhaps and get accommodations. And, you know, you'll never completely understand the smoke and mirrors. There's certain, you know, things go 90 days, certain things happen, and there's bank policy. But the more you can communicate, and again, try it best to preserve cash by delaying payments, I think is the strategy.
Okay, and since you brought it up in the interconnectedness, I'm going to throw this one at Roy. I hope you like complex puzzles. We got folks out there saying, yeah, but everybody's in this position. I've got suppliers that want me to pay faster. I've got customers that want me to ship, but want to delay payment. You know, I've got a landlord that's calling me, and I've got to talk to the bank. You know, how do I start negotiating when everybody is changing the rules all at once? I guess how do you focus? Where do you focus? Is there some sort of method people can put in place?
Sure. So as an entrepreneur and also as an EIR advising clients every day, you know, the starting point for me is the budget. You know, it's income and expenses. And, you know, the reality of what that looks like, you know, would determine, you know, what flexibility may or may not exist. And in my previous comments, you know, I talked about being completely transparent and ahead of it in order to, one, preserve the relationship. But I think when you lay it on a line like that, and of course there's a risk with being transparent and open with the intent of preserving the relationship, I think people subscribe to that better, and they're able to at least, you know, consider what it is that you're offering. And then the other thing is, you know, after you've done all of that due diligence and you've established a baseline of what flexibility may or may not exist, you know, for me, it's being specific with what the ask is. So, you know, to Ann's point, if it's delaying, you know, principal and interest payments, you know, that is the specific ask. If it's that and something else, because the due diligence suggests that, you know, within a 30, 60, 90-day window, you know, we'll be in a better position to do more than what we can. And so all of that gets articulated in what your specific ask is.
I had something to add. Oh.
I'm going to say Sam first, and then you. Go ahead, Sam.
Yeah, Bill, I think that one of the most confusing things in a crisis is knowing where to start. And there's a technique that you know, is known as scenario planning. But I would tell an entrepreneur to grab a couple trusted advisors. If they don't have them already, reach out to your friends and family network and get somebody who is familiar with banking, if it's banking you're concerned about, or real estate or general contracts, the supply chain, whatever, and run through, you know, in 2 or 3 hours, you can identify the 4 or 5 most likely scenarios. One is every domino falls, right? The contract above me breaks, and then I have to break mine, and all those dominoes. What if I don't, but my supplier breaks my contract? You can run through the scenarios. You can quickly identify the 3 or 4 major hinge points. I have found that doing this sort of thing with a couple other people really identifies the place that is essential to start. And that can be really, you know, really helpful for entrepreneurs. You can look at scenario planning. You know, there's a one-page outline of how to do it on the web. There are hundreds of them. You can take a quick look, grab a couple trusted people and do it, and it will really help you focus on those critical couple things to focus on.
Kid, and I'm going to make a statement before I pass it to Ann. As hard as it may be, you've got to remove emotion from this. I'm not asking you as a startup owner or business owner to give up a child. This is a business. Under no circumstances should your negotiations jeopardize you, your family, your health, and your future. So when you do scenario planning, one of the variables is you. Always remember that. So with that, Ann.
Wow, that's hard to follow.
Sorry.
I've been telling my entrepreneurs in terms of the where to start, because that is the immediate biggest challenge. I kind of have three measures. One, I call the food chain model. It's, look at your food chain, and people below you on your food chain, take care of them, and people above you, lean on them. So in all circumstances, take care of your employees, whatever that means. Take care of your employees, take care of your employees. And then if you look up the food chain and someone's larger and stronger, lean on them. I hate to put it back on the banks, but I'm not a banker anymore, so I can do it. But, banks are going to be bailed out. They're going to be around. So lean on those stronger than you and take care of those weaker than you. Kind of the second thing from my bankruptcy days is, make a list of your critical vendors, the ones that you absolutely need. And, in a bankruptcy scenario, that's a little more complicated, but in a small business scenario, it's just who do you absolutely need? And that's kind of where you start. The third, which is a little more technical, is kind of the idea of operating leverage, and just as many costs that you can change to variable, change them to variable. So if you can call your landlord and say, hey, I'll pay you 10% of my revenue in rent, that helps. If you could say to your employees, I'll pay you your base or 75% of your base, and if we get through this thing, fine, I'll pay the other half. That way you, again, are preserving cash, but you're also getting buy-in from those entities to your success and survival.
Thanks. I'm going to ask, because we're now talking about multifaceted value chain negotiations. Jonathan, as somebody that makes a living documenting things, what level's sufficient? I mean, is an email okay? I mean, is this something where we got to go modify contracts, add addenda? I mean, what, because speed is so important, when do you call a lawyer? When do you just say, hey, we both agreed on this? Go ahead.
So the answer is it depends, like every good legal question. Look, at the end of the day, it's really what's going to work between the parties. And if a supplier is fine with that email, that's great. If a bank needs 20 pages that's signed in quadruplicate, then make it happen. I think that's going to be less important at the end of the day than having that next evolution of the agreement, of the arrangement, because then in 6 months that supply arrangement is going to adjust again. And so if you need another email to fix it, or you need to go back to your lenders and you adjust some covenants and you need 20 more pages to fix that, then so be it. So it's really going to depend on what's sufficient for the parties. If you're the one being adjusted on, for lack of a better way of putting it, you're making the concession. Don't I usually say my colleagues who I share walls with, but that would be my kids now. So my partners might not agree with this, but look, at the end of the day, it doesn't need to be written in blood. So allow those parties you're taking care of to put something down together, to move on to the next step, so that you maintain that relationship. Because again, and this was Sam's initial point, right? It is a continuing evolution of these things. So let's get through over this hurdle, and then to the next one, without worrying too much about the legal pieces of the puzzle.
And
Okay,
Bill,
go ahead.
If you don't have to go through a multi-page, multi-step contractual process, you can become more agile. You can say, how about for the next month, I pay you 10% of my revenue, and then we reevaluate. And you can pass the brief email by Jonathan, but the fact of the matter is, the world is getting more agile. And if you don't think in terms of having to put that contract in blood every time, you'll shift your mindset, and you'll begin to get more agile with your partners. You can often get a much more successful renegotiation if they don't think they've just signed new terms that exist off into the future.
Which brings me right to Dan. What do you want to see? I mean, what do you want to see as proof of hardship, or, I mean, as proof of ability to pay? I mean, you've got tenants, you've got customers. I said, if they're asking you to make a concession, what do you want to see?
That really depends. I guess it's the same way, just like Jonathan was saying on the legal stuff. For us, I'll look at if it's a tenant that's been with us for 15 years and I know them and trust them, I'm pretty much not going to ask for much of anything. If it's somebody that I do think, because that is a little problem right now, is we're trying to sort out who's just asking because they can and who's really has some hardship. So I think the short answer is it really depends. There are certain colleagues of mine that are part of the NEI network that I was on a conference call earlier today that are sending the things to all their tenants. If they come back to them, the first thing they ask is, have you looked at business interruption insurance? Have you looked into this SBA 7A, 7B that's just coming out? And if they say no, then they ask them to go back and do those. If they come back, then again, they're asking them for some proof of financial hardship. I think it just depends. And quite frankly, with where we're at right now, we're trying to work through this because most of the March payments were paid. So we're just now starting to get into this with a lot of different people. So it's like I said, we've been reaching out to some of them in advance. Some of them have reached out to us in advance. But it really depends on the relationship and the tenant. If it was somebody that was in trouble before, there's probably, it's only going to get worse.
So, which, and I'll throw this one to both Sam and Roy, and I'll do it in that order. If you're the organized one in your value chain, you're the one thinking of this, of thinking of the contingencies and how this can play out, and you've done the scenario planning. Do you pick up the phone to your customers? Do you pick up the phone to your vendors and try to, or people down beneath you in the value chain, and organize their thinking for them? Because kind of what Dan was saying is, with the tenants, have you looked at this? Have you looked at that? I mean, do you put something out there that says, here's these steps, that let's have a conversation, or do you just wait for them to do it?
Bill, I've never, I don't think I've ever increased my value by sitting back and not acting. And maybe more importantly, if you are the organized one and you can develop the framework for a solution, you may be able to get an advantage. Now we don't want to talk about predatory behavior in a crisis, but the fact of the matter is, if you are the one who can reach out to your suppliers and reach out to your customers and begin to translate the impact across an entire supply chain, food chain, value chain, and begin to create a temporary or new normal framework, then you're driving the outcome. The alternative is to be driven by the outcome, and I'd always rather be in the driver's seat.
Roy?
Agreed. I would always want to be in the driver's seat as well. So if I'm the organized one, I'm going to be proactive and engage, but I'm going to leave it open for some feedback and negotiation. So I'd like to hear what they're offering, but reach out first and engage them. And then based upon what they're offering, that puts me in a position to counter. But I've already gone through the contingencies and outlined what they are before I reach out and try to engage. But the message here is to be proactive and reach out, engage, maybe not script the conversation, but certainly engage and be in a position to hear what their offers are or what their contingencies are.
Okay,
Roy makes a really important point. He said, think about the contingency first. It is essential. First of all, I don't think you can over communicate, but before you do, you have to know what your best alternative is if you can't renegotiate. In other words, if you're stuck with the agreement that you have and the other party or parties are unwilling to renegotiate, you need to sit down and think about what is your best alternative. Is it to default? Right? Is it to invoke the force majeure clause? Is it to go public and try and shame your partners on Twitter? You want to think about those alternatives in terms of the sustainability of your business, in terms of the long-term relationship you'd like to have with your partners and your external perception. But if you don't know if you don't think through contingencies and really identify what your best alternative is, you don't have a basis for beginning any renegotiation. So I do really want to echo what Roy said. Think about the contingencies, think about your best possible alternative if you can't renegotiate anything, and then you'll know exactly what is better if you manage to renegotiate.
Yeah, quantifying is important. You don't just whine and complain. Have a potential solution. I'm going to ask a couple super specific questions because these are these are kind of critical. First off, is business interruption insurance normally in your policy? And I know the answer to the next one. Can it be added after the fact? The answer to that one's no. It's like wrecking your car and trying to get insurance to pay for the wreck afterwards. So first one, anybody want to weigh in on it being a normal part of your insurance policy?
I have exercised a business interruption policy when I was chief restructuring officer. It was in there. It was extremely difficult to get paid on. We got paid, but it was a year and a half later, and we had to have forensic accountants. So, and maybe in this environment, there'll be changes and there'll be relaxation, but you know, in 2008, it was very hard to realize on that.
Yeah, don't forget about the immediacy of things. You don't have a year and a half to wait. The next one, we'll stick with the banking thing. Can SBA loans be renegotiated, i.e. the interest rate?
Anything can be renegotiated. It depends in part whether the SBA holds the paper or whether the bank holds the paper. But I think in this environment, anything is up for grabs, especially with the SBA coming forward with so many new programs with lower rates. I would say yes.
Okay, I'm going to ask a couple vendor supplier oriented things. How can you renegotiate with consultants deferring payments? You know, they have their own concerns. I guess what can you do with 1099s or consulting firms that are doing hourly work for you? I guess what can you do around that? Sam, you look like you have some input.
Well, I mean, look, Bill, you know, if you're on consulting contracts, I think much like real estate, often there's a month-to-month flow of that, and I'm doing two things. If I can't handle the current month's nut, I mean, just out of concern, I'd be out there saying, we got to head this off. You may need to trim your work, and you may need to trim the work in the foreseeable future. Here's the projected cash flow. You know, I've been involved in a lot of 1099 contracts that have a base level, and then they've got additive on top of that, and that's just a straight contractual. At least for me, it's a straight contractual, you know, renegotiation. What's been really interesting of late is that you know, there've been some interesting employment decisions on whether 1099s are really 1099s, and so I would want to be very careful before I simply decided that was a contract I could break and make sure I didn't end up with any inadvertent employment issues. I'd consult an employment attorney if it could be considered a quasi-employee.
Yeah, and I would echo, having been out of that, you've got to open up discussions. You've got to talk to the people. They all have nuts to cover as well, both whether they're a firm or not. I would highly discourage what one extremely large bank did in the last crisis, where we were a consulting firm working with the bank, and without going into detail who or what happened, they scheduled a vendor call for every one of their information technology vendors across the country. The sum total of the call was this: your terms were 45 days, they are now 180 days. You will give us a 20% discount for all uninvoiced as well as work going forward from here. If you don't like it, get everyone out of our building by the end of the day. Thank you, we're not taking questions. Click. That, and on the recipients of that weren't just the little guys and girls. It was IBM, and Cisco and global consulting firms all heard, we're cutting you 20 now. And by the way, we'll pay you someday. If you're not in a position of power, you got to watch out for that for yourself as well. I have another specific one around inventory. Somebody that's kind of caught in the middle. They've got orders for customers that they were made before the crisis. They had purchase orders. They're ready to ship, but the customers wouldn't receive orders for at least another month. They paid for all the labor and materials already as the middle person. If they're lucky, they'll get paid for it in July. Is there any way to address that through negotiations, or is this one of those life-changing or business-changing scenarios? I see Ann nodding. I guess where do you start? Because you've seen this from a restructuring and from the stop in 2008. Ann, do you want to take that?
Yeah, it's almost, that's a tough one. I think it depends on if you have 5 customers or 5,000 customers, and if they're retail customers or they're business customers. If you have 5 customers, I would just get on the phone with each customer and say, and try to assess their need for what you're shipping and their likelihood of being able to survive and pay. You've already got your costs fully in, but on the other hand, there might be another customer that could take that material and pay for it in a hurry. Now, that works with 5 or 10 customers. It doesn't work with thousands of customers or retail customers. Yeah, I think that's a hard decision. But I think it has to be case by case. And if it's perishable, that makes a difference. If it's custom, that makes a difference. It's a lot of specifics that go into an answer like that. But again, I think everything is negotiation.
Bill,
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
there may be entrepreneurial companies who do not have sophisticated financing arrangements or sophisticated working capital arrangements for inventory. And it's different if it's work in progress, that's intangible. But if they have inventory and it's not already financed and it's going to sit for a while, it may be possible to get, because there's a tangible asset there. If it's not perishable, it may be possible to get some financing associated with that if it's going to have a long dwell time in inventory. And that's something that you should call a bank and explore, or specialty inventory financing companies. You may not love it, but it may help you get through a trough where you're stuck with it.
Yeah, and right now it's cash flow is what matters. So making a profit on this stuff, whatever this stuff might be, isn't it. It's about covering your costs. It's about covering your nut. So if you've got salespeople, tell them to pick up the phone and find somebody to buy it, even if it's not the customer that you had currently. Get out there. There may be somebody somewhere that needs what you've got, and it's sales job to find them.
And Bill, this is a classic opportunity to preserve a customer relationship, but do the best for your business. If the customer calls and says not going to be able to pay till July, the way to preserve that relationship but do the best thing for your business is say, okay, fantastic. I need you to know that I can't hold on to the inventory. So I'm going to get on the phone and try and sell it. And if I believe I'm getting near sale, I'll call you back and see if you might have managed to free up cash so that you can have the product. This way, your customer knows you're trying to do something, do right by them, but at the same time, you're preserving your flexibility.
I think also this is where speed really works in your favor, because before people realize that they really couldn't afford to pay you for what they just bought, if you push it out quickly, because there's going to be second and third and fourth waves of this, and people are going to start making different decisions personally and in their business as time goes on.
And I'll use the second, third, and fourth waves. I'm going to ask this of Dan. From a landlord tenant standpoint, what's the time horizon that they should be planning around this?
That's a loaded question.
You got the hard one.
I know.
I don't know. The question is, how long is it going to go on for? So, and I think a little bit depends on the business. If you look at the fitness places, I know one national fitness place that came and said, we're not paying for a year. Went to all the landlords and rolled that out. So they certainly think, I don't think it's going to go on that long, but they certainly think it's going to be a while till they can get back into business and a while till they get back up. Other people, I mean, I match it up more with what the banks are doing with us. And the banks, the majority of the banks seem to be coming back and saying, look, let's look at a 90-day window and then come back and reevaluate this. So that's kind of what I'm doing, or we're doing, is a similar thing with tenants, is saying, let's look at this short term, let's see what happens, and then let's come back to it if we need to. But I'm not really looking to do much past about a 90-day period at this point in time.
Okay, and that's actually the answer I was looking for. People have to understand this is a dynamic situation. This isn't a discrete event that we know what this is going to look like. If we're going to get a second round of the virus in the fall, I mean, when a vaccine or an antiviral is going to come through, we just don't know. And it's nice to hear somebody up the food chain from everybody, be it a bank, because there's all these new SBA programs and the CARE Act and everything that's come through. Nobody knows what's going on yet. The lawyers and the bankers are going crazy trying to figure out and how they're going to administer this. But they're playing in a window that they can kind of grasp, which is that 90 days, but don't think it's only 90 days. There may be other smaller windows. There may be continued windows. We don't know yet, but don't, like Sam said earlier, negotiations are ongoing. As all of our panelists brought up, it's communication. You've got to keep the communications over. Once you got your concessions, that doesn't mean you never call Dan again. Keep a pulse going. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit here and kind of head in the employee direction. Jonathan, have employees that are co-owners, co-founders, key employee agreements. They're not quite at will. They may or may not have stock. I mean, what's my option there? I mean, what's an entrepreneur's option of renegotiating there?
So there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle. If we first think about scenarios which are sometimes very very front of mind, instead of making this this compensation payment, I'll offer my employees equity, and that process has embedded inside of it so much tax related friction, candidly, that it's something that if it's really being thought through, it's probably not the path to follow. So even if we just take a really high level approach and we think about limited liability companies, if your business is an LLC and you say, instead of paying these employees, I'm going to give them some equity, and you actually get to the point where you're able to document it, actually what you've done with respect to all of those employees is you've just changed them from W-2 employees to K-1 partners. So now all of a sudden, these individuals have to pay taxes on their own. All of those withholding requirements no longer apply. It gets incredibly messed up quickly, to be candid. So so many businesses are organized as LLCs, which can be great. But it's really a black hole that can be incredibly problematic. The one other point on this, and really I could talk on this one for quite a while, just because especially in 2008 we saw lots of mistakes made, and I'm sure we helped lots of companies make those mistakes, just to be honest, right? But the other thing to be careful of is, oh well, I'll treat the compensation as a loan. Well, that's incredibly difficult, because really what that means is you've paid the employee the money and then they've given it back to you, which means all of those withholdings, all of the taxes, all of that comes with it. And so most companies, because they're trying to conserve capital, they're not going to make those withholdings. They're not going to pay those amounts over. And so now the company is on the hook. It's failed to make its requisite withholdings. The employee hasn't paid tax on those dollars. And the flip side of all of that is that the loan, in theory, has interest that the IRS is going to say is being earned by the employee. So it's, again, a big mess. Really, there are creative ways to address it. You just need to be deliberate about it and thoughtful. And really, that is just sort of the tip of the iceberg.
Sam, do you want to add anything to that? I mean,
Well, look, I tend to think of the team as the greatest asset that the company has, and I try and treat them with the most care. Um, and uh, and so I think they are the ones with whom you can't over communicate. You have to be totally transparent, and you want to try and provide the least difficulty and the fewest consequences if possible. But regardless, I would say be brutally honest. And as Jonathan said, they're going to care about feeding their families and satisfying their obligations. They're going to worry more about cash than, say, the upside of equity down the road. And I think, in fairness to a team, um, I would act decisively, act quickly, and unfortunately, I would assume the worst case. Because if you don't assume the worst case, you may crater the company for everybody, as opposed to um, laying off some set of people or being unable to pay some set of people and letting them know, uh, and allowing the company to survive another day and some employees to benefit.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that, and it comes around to what Ann said earlier about time being of the essence. Putting off the decisions, hoping it's going to get better, hoping things are going to resolve quick, and you could see the entire panel shaking their heads, is going to just lead to a slower, more painful death. You will fail. If you make the admittedly horrible choices that are needed to be made, and I made these mistakes. I think there's nodding out there of entrepreneurs on this panel that have made these mistakes. You will be better in the long run. The company will be around to hire people back, and you'll end up employing people. You will not destroy morale, because having one person not show up every other day is not the way to do it. If you have that core team that you can rely on, that have bought into the adjustments, have bought into the hard times, you will have a group of people that you will never separate. Go ahead.
And the compassionate thing to do, if you have to lay off people, is pick up the phone and use your network and see if you can find them something. I know it's a tough time, but there are positions that are in demand, and that is the way to exercise your compassion, not the slow road to unsustainability by keeping everybody on, if you can't do that.
And if you're a consulting firm or a services firm, it may be with your customer. You can pick up the phone and say, hey, I know they're a consultant in there right now. I know there's a non-compete agreement we have in place with you, back to negotiations. Would you be willing to take them on, full or part-time? I can't keep them. And you know what? You've kept a happy employee that is going to no longer be an employee, but will be employed. You've got a customer that's happy, so you're more likely to get future business from them, and you will feel better in the end. But you did the right thing by everybody, so don't discount those things. Another specific, totally tangential question for our banker. For those of us who own transportation companies, got a bank loan for their vehicles. Anything different they have to do on a vehicle renegotiation? Is that open? I mean, is there a different way to cover it? Suggestions?
I think in general, you want to make sure you keep it insured. Don't, and if you can't keep it insured, tell your bank, because they can force place insurance. The last thing you want to do is expose yourself to more liability because you're trying to preserve cash. The other thing is I've seen where vehicle fleets are repurposed. And so there could be somebody out there that needs a fleet, delivery fleet or whatever, that you can call your banker and say, I don't need this fleet now, and my contract says I can't sublease it technically, but can we work out an arrangement where I can put the equipment to use? But I think the important thing is to make sure that you keep track of the inventory and that you keep the inventory insured. And if you can't, you let the bank know so that you don't have greater losses from something else happening.
And this is to the whole panel. Can people start expecting, from a supply standpoint, being asked to go to COD, cash on delivery, for inventory? We've got a nodding. Go ahead, Ann.
I mean, I would say yes. I mean, the idea is slow payments accelerate cash, and everybody's doing that. And on your side of cash acceleration is somebody else's deferral, which is kind of why you want to be there first. You want to preserve your cash, accelerate cash coming in, and slow it going out. So I do think COD is going to become, especially as resources become scarce.
Roy, is that something you look to your customers and either discuss with them, just turn it on? I mean, do you discuss discounts? And if you do offer discounts in order for them to pay quicker, I mean, how do you get it back up to the right payment level later without the discounts?
Absolutely. So the ultimate goal is cash flow in this situation. So, discounts and promotions encourage on-time or early payments. I would certainly lead with that. The other thing that I would do is I would bundle offerings with future discounts, as incentives to my suppliers, and then for incentive to my customers, I would upsell, follow-on solutions that are logical for them at discounted or promotional rates, just to get them to bite sooner than later. Even if we're just booking the business for the current or a future month, and then that way, it assists with my cash flow projections, during the current or future quarter. So absolutely, I would engage, in those conversations in both directions. Absolutely.
We only have a couple of minutes left here. Is there anything the panel hasn't heard, would like to bring up, things that they're running into that they want to leave as kind of parting thoughts with the audience, the attendees?
I had two things. One, in negotiations, it's probably not going to be one negotiation. So don't try to go for the kill, because you're going to be back in front of that person and keep that bad taste in their mouth. So it's kind of one of many. And so if you don't get exactly what you want on the first one, you're going to be back at the table. The other thing is, just in the workout world, this is the time when you see behaviors and personality traits that really separate people. And so remember, as you're going through this process, everybody's looking. And when we come out of it, there's going to be people who handled it ethically and with integrity, and then there's going to be the others. And so you want to be on the right side of that characterization.
I think that's well said, Ann. I mean, I think the key is there is no playbook for this. It's a mutual sacrifice. Everybody goes in it and tries to do the right thing, and it will work out. It's short term.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I think, right, you keep your values in front of you and in front of your whole team, and continue to uphold those, and let them be the basis of what you're doing. I think you'll come out of this well. And on the exact opposite side of that, high concept, I think Roy said it earlier, but I think the one bit of tactic that is really helpful is making a specific proposal that the other party can react to. That's really a helpful tactic, to go in the door and say, look, here's all the background. I have a specific proposal, because that'll help put them in the right negotiating frame of mind, and it'll give them a basis against which to react. So high concept, maintain your values. Very small tactic, be very specific about your initial proposal.
And I'll just hammer that point home, because the last piece of that is it's a speed issue, and everyone said it right. But I think there's always a concern that you are going to negotiate against yourself if you lead with a suggestion. But as someone who spends my time basically managing back and forths, I'll be the first to tell you that just as soon as we have a top end and a low end, we can get to whatever the middle point is. And at the end of the day, there won't be situations where when you ask for X and everybody else gets something slightly better, that you can't come back and say, well, hey, we'd like what everyone else got. There will be situations where you'll be left behind because everyone else will have gotten their X, and because you weren't upfront about it, you missed the boat. So you know, speed to the finish line, I think, is the way to go here.
And I'll place before I close this up. Pick up the phone. This is not an email conversation. This is not a back and forth over email. You're a human being dealing with human beings. They ultimately make the decisions. Get on a video conference. Everybody's doing things remotely. Get on a web conference. If it's multiple parties, get on the phone, but do this as face to face as you can. Not just a series of well-worded emails, because you'll be far more effective. With that, I'd like to thank my panelists for participating and getting a lot of important information out to the entrepreneurs and business owners. I'd like to thank the attendees. We want to wish you the best of health to you and your family. Wish you the best of luck in getting through this. Please feel free to reach out to us. We have a list of resources out on the Jumpstart site. You can apply for help there. There's an email if you have a more immediate question for folks. Ask an expert at jumpstartinc.org. So with that, thank you all, and stay healthy.